Chapter 51. In the morning when July was making coffee, they began to hear the sounds of cattle. They were camped near a little creek and the flats were misty, so he couldn't see much, but over the mists he could hear cattle bawling and cowboys hollering at them. Probably a herd had been bedded nearby and the boys were trying to get them moving. Joe was yawning and trying to get away. The hardest part of traveling was trying to start early. Just when he was sleeping best, July would get up and start saddling his horse. By the time the sun was beginning to thin out the mists, they had their coffee and a bite of bacon and were horseback. The herd was in sight, spread out over the plain for 3 or 4 miles, thousands of cattle in it. Neither July nor Joe had ever seen a herd so large, and they paused for a moment to look at it. The morning plains were still dewy. "How many is it?" Joe asked. He had never dreamed there could be so many cattle in one place. "I don't know. Thousands," July said. "I've heard South Texas is nothing but cattle." Though the herd was in progress, the camp crew wasn't. The cook was packing his pots and skillets into a wagon. "I guess we ought to ask them if they seen Roscoe," July said. "He could be south of us, or they might have news of Jake." They loped over to the wagon just as the wrangler turned loose the horse herd. The horses, 50 or 60 of them, were jumping and frisky, kicking up their heels and nickering at one another, glad to be moving. July and Joe waited until the wrangler had them headed north before trotting on toward the wagon. The cook wore an old black hat and had a long, dirty beard. "You're too late, boys," he said. "Haynes just ate me out of breakfast." "Well, we've et," July said, noticing for the first time a man sitting on the tarp by the ashes of the campfire. The unusual thing about the man was that he was reading a book. His horse, a fine-looking black, was saddled and grazing a few yards away. "Where would I find the boss?" July asked, addressing himself to the old cook. "I'm the boss. That's why I've got time to read," the reading man said. "My name's Will Barger." He wore an iron-rimmed spectacles. "I like to snatch a minute from Mr. Milton, and the morning's my only hope," Will Barger added. "At night I'm apt to be in a stampede, and you can't read Mr. Milton during a stampede, not and take his sense. My days are mostly taken up with lunkheads and weather and sick horses, but I sometimes get a moment of peace after breakfast." The man looked at them sternly through his glasses. Joe, who had hated what little schooling he'd had, was at a loss to know why a grown man would sit around and read on a pretty day. "I'm sorry to interrupt you," July said. "Are you a lawman?" Will Barger asked in his impatient way. "I am," July said. "And you're going to have to listen to some complaints about the law in this state," Will Barger said. "I've never seen a place with less law. The further south you go, the worse the horse thieves get. Along that border, they're thicker than ticks." "Well, I ain't from Texas. I'm from Arkansas," July said. "It's a weak excuse," Will Barger said, marking his place with a grass blade and standing up. "I didn't notice much law in Arkansas either. There's law of sorts in New Orleans, but out here it's every man for himself." "Well, there's Texas Rangers, but I guess they mostly fight the Indians," July said, wondering where the conversation would end. "Yes, I met a couple," Will Barger said. "They were excellent horse thieves themselves. They stole my remuda back from some sly Mexicans. Are you looking for a killer or what?" "Yes, a man named Jake Spoon," July said. "He killed a dentist in Fort Smith." Will Barger tucked his book carefully in his bedroll and tossed the bedroll in the back of the wagon. "You overshot Mr. Spoon," he said. "He was recently seen in the town of Lonesome where he won $20 from a hand of mine. However, he is headed this way. He partnered up with the gentleman who got my horses back. If I were you, I'd camp here and put this boy in school. They'll be along 2 or 3 weeks." "I thank you for the information," July said. "I don't suppose you've run across a man named Roscoe Brown along the trail?" "Nope. Who'd he kill?" Will Barger asked. "Nobody," July said. "He's my deputy. It may be that he's lost." "The name Roscoe don't inspire confidence," Will Barger said. "People named Roscoe ought to stick to clerking. However, it's summertime. At least your man won't freeze to death. Any more people you looking for?" "No, just them 2, July said, refraining from mentioning Elmira. Will Barger mounted. "I hope you hang Spoon promptly," he said. "I expect he's a card cheat, and card cheats undermine society faster than anything. If you find your deputy, see if you can steer him into clerking." With that, he trotted over to the cook. "Are you coming with us, Bob?" he asked. "No," Cook said. I'm planning to marry and settle down here in North Texas." "I hope you marry someone who can cook," Will Barger said. "If you do, let me know. When she gets ready to leave you, I'll hire her." He looked around at Joe. "Need a job, son?" he asked. "We need a boy that don't ask questions and is handy with an axe. I don't know about your chopping skills, but you ain't asked a question yet." Will Barger seemed serious, and July was tempted to let Joe do it. Going north with a herd would be a good experience for him. The main advantage, though, was that he thought himself then could travel alone with just his thoughts. Without Joe to look after, he could better accomplish the main task ahead, which was to find Elmira. Joe was startled. He'd never expected to be offered a job with a cow outfit, and hearing the words was a thrill. But of course he couldn't take it. He had been assigned to July. "Much obliged," he said. "I reckon I can't." "Well, the job's open," Will Barger said. "We may meet again, and I've got to lope up to Red River to see if I think the water's fresh enough for my stock." "What'll you do if it ain't?" Joe asked. He had never known anyone who just said one unusual thing after another as Will Barger did. How could the water in the river not be fresh enough for cows? "Well, I could piss in it to show it what I thought of it," Will Barger said. "Could you use any company?" July asked. "We're going up that way." "Oh, I can always use good conversation when I can get it," Will Barger said. "I was brought up to expect good conversation, but then I run off to the wilderness, and it's been spotty ever since." "Why are you going north when the man you want is to the south?" "I've got other business as well," July said. He didn't want to describe it, though. He hadn't meant to ask Will Barger if they could ride along. He wouldn't ordinarily have done it, but then his life was no longer ordinary. His wife was lost, and his deputy also. He felt more confused than he ever had in his life, whereas Will Barger was a man who seemed far less confused than most. He seemed to know his mind immediately, whatever the question put to him. Will Barger started at once and loped several miles without speaking. Joe loped with him. The country was open, lightly spotted with elm and post oak. They came to a fair-sized stream, and Will Barger stopped to water his horse. "Have you been to Colorado?" July asked. "Yes, once," Will Barger said. "Denver's no worse than most towns out here. I intend to avoid that country, though. The Indians in those parts ain't entirely reformed, and the outlaws are meaner than the Indians with less excuse." It was not comforting talk when one's wife was said to be on a whiskey boat going up the Arkansas. "Plan a trip to Colorado?" Will Barger asked. "I don't know," July said. "Maybe." "Well, if you go up the plains and get scalped, there'll be that much less law in Arkansas," Will Barger said. "But then there might not be that much crime in Arkansas now. I guess most of the crime's moved to Texas." July wasn't listening. He was trying to convince himself that Peach was wrong, that Elmira had just gone wandering for a few days. When Will Barger started to move on, July did not. "Thanks for the company," he said. "I think we better go look for my deputy." "There's a perfectly straight trail from Fort Smith into Texas," Will Barger said. "Captain Marcy laid it out. If that deputy can't even stay in a road, I expect you ought to fire him." Then he loped away without saying goodbye. Joe wished they were going with him. In only a few hours, the man had paid him several compliments and offered to hire him. He found himself feeling resentful both of July and Roscoe. July didn't seem to know what he wanted to do, and as for Roscoe, if he couldn't stay in a road, then he deserved to be lost. He wished he'd spoken up and grabbed the job when Will Barger offered it. But the moment had been missed. Will Barger was already out of sight, and they were still sitting there. July looked depressed, as he had ever since they left Fort Smith. Finally, without a word, he turned east, back toward Arkansas. Joe wished he was old enough to point out to July that nothing he was doing made any sense, but he knew July probably wouldn't even hear him in the state he was in. Joe felt annoyed, but he kept quiet, followed along.